Okay, hey guys, we're back in the same project again, and this video won't make much sense to first years. This is something I've done with second years. First years we're going to be doing this either after Christmas or we may touch on it next year, and it's just a more advanced way of applying materials to the landscape. So this is going to be something called blended landscape materials, where we'll take multiple materials from Quixel Bridge and then we will make it so we can basically paint them on in different areas of the landscape. So let's jump in. So we're back in the same project as last time. So the first thing we're going to do is set up for our new material. So if we right click in the content browser and go to material, and then we can name it, I'm going to name it MM for master material, which will make more sense when we go over master materials and material instances later on in the year, and then underscore landscape, and this is going to be our landscape's master material, and it's almost going to act as like a template for things that we can plug into it at a later date. So I'm just going to dock that window at the top, and we're back in our material view, which hopefully you remember from last time we looked at it. So we're going to need to mostly pay attention to the base color, the roughness, and the normal for this landscape material. And there are a few new nodes that we're going to be introduced to. So the first one, if we right click and search for landscape, is the landscape layer blend. So if we add that in, this node doesn't look like much to begin with because we've not added in any variables to it. So with it selected, the landscape layer blend node, if we come over to our details panel on the bottom left, we should see that under layers we have 0 array elements. We need to add some, and this is basically adding in however many layers that we're going to have to our material. So for this video we're just going to do 3. But when I did this with the second years a few weeks ago, some of you were experimenting and got all the way up to 12 materials, I think one of you had. And you can really just push this as much as you like. So I'm going to click the add button and we'll see 1, 2, and 3 array elements. And if we look at the node, we now have 3 different inputs to go along with that output, but they're all called layer none. So in that details panel again, if we go to one of those new indexes that we've just added, or array elements, and we click the little arrow that points to the right next to it, it reveals all of the settings for that layer, including the layer name. So we're going to change that. So we're just going to do a really basic one for this. We're not going to try and make it look super pretty at the end. That's something that will come with time and practice. So for the first layer, I'm going to change the layer name to be grass, and this is going to be where we plug in our grass material. If I hit enter, it changes in the node to layer grass. So I'm going to go through the next 2. The next one is going to be, let's say, dirt. That'll be a nice easy one to find. And the last one we'll do is sand. So we now have 3 inputs on our landscape layer blend. We have the layer grass, layer dirt, and layer sand, and this is where we're going to plug in those different materials. So I'm going to use this first landscape layer blend, to be my base color. So I'm going to just quickly plug the output pipe into the base color just by clicking and dragging. And now we can start to set up where those textures are going to go into the material. So the texture, of course, being the 2D file that we would make in Photoshop or we can download from somewhere. So I'm going to right click and search for texture sample. And then I'm just going to use the base texture sample and we get this node appear. Now this node is, you'll recognize some of the output pins. We've got RGB, which will take the full color, or we can take the individual just R, just G, just B, and then this A is the alpha that we explored in one of the theory sessions a few weeks ago. We're not going to need to worry about that for the base color, but it will get a bit more advanced when we get to the roughness, the ambient occlusion, and some other bits as well. Now, this texture sample, I am going to copy and paste it with Control-C, Control-V, so I have 3 of them. I'm going to plug the top one into layer grass, the middle one into layer dirt, and the bottom one into layer sand. The only reason being is to try and keep things more organized. If you do things all over the place like this, and you've got all these pipes crossing each other, it gets very difficult to try and trace things back and work out what may have gone wrong. So it's always easiest to try and keep things nice and organized. And I have done that wrong again anyway. So let's flip these around. There we go. Magic. So now it's very easy to see which one is going to be which. And when we download our textures later, we will be able to drag and drop our textures into the texture box on each of these texture samplers, and that will basically be a ready-made input for us. But we need to duplicate this a couple more times. So what I'm going to do to stay organized is I'm going to move everything up so I've got a bit of space. And with everything selected by clicking and dragging over it, and it's all highlighted, I'm going to press C on the keyboard. Now C encases everything into a comment box. So if I move this comment box around, it moves all of my nodes. I don't have to go in and keep highlighting all of them. And I can also change the title. So I'm going to change the title to be base color. To change the title, you just double click at the top of the box. And now I can very easily tell this is my base color, and I can very quickly go and find more things as we add them. So we want to completely repeat this setup. Unfortunately, Unreal isn't the cleverest software, so if we just copy and paste the comment box, it will give us an empty comment box, which has also just messed up and dragged some of my nodes away. So we do have to click and drag over everything to be able to copy and paste. So I'm going to copy, and over here I'm going to paste. And I'm going to put this just below, and I'm going to name this one normal. And that's going to be our normal texture input. And then we need one more, so I'm going to scroll a bit further down and paste again. And I am going to name this one ORD. And that'll make sense a bit later. So, for now, we can start plugging things in. So the normal, we're going to plug into the normal. We've already got base color connected. The ORD will connect up once we've got the textures in place, because there's a little bit of extra explaining in there. So let's go and find some textures. I'll very likely speed this bit up so you don't have to watch me surfing through Quixel Bridge. But easiest place to find them is always going to be Quixel Bridge. So I'm going to speed this bit up for you guys. Hopefully you'll see me sitting here at the bottom, frantically looking around. There we go.
The cold blue sky, so clear from my view. I'm standing still, the world still moves. I'm counting sheep to try to fall asleep, wondering why
Okay, out of fast forward mode. So I've got my 3 materials downloaded. So we've got dry sand, savanna dry grass, and wild grass. Now, if we go back into our material, obviously we've not got the content browser up at the minute. So I'm just going to rearrange my layout a bit, which is going to make things a bit easier. So I'm going to make the details panel a little bit bigger. If you ever want to change the size of a panel, just go just to its border, and your cursor should change to be 2 arrows pointing in opposite directions, be it up and down or left and right, and you can always drag and change the size. Now, I'm going to open the content drawer, do exactly the same as we always do, click on Dock in Layout, and then I can click and drag it down to, I'm going to put it to the very bottom of everything, and then just make it a bit smaller. And for now, I don't need the substrate tab or the stats tab. There we go. So we've changed things up and made things more customized to our needs. Now, let's start by doing the base color. Very easy. So, the top texture sample node is plugged into our grass. So we need to find our wild grass and just find the color texture. So the textures from Quixel Bridge, the first one should always be your color texture and should be the color of whatever it is you want. And it's usually denoted with T, underscore, and then the name. So I'm going to drag and drop this to the texture box, which as soon as you start dragging it, you should see that box on the left highlighted in blue. And drop it on, and then we can see that is the base color map for our grass. So I'm going to click on the dirt node and do the same with the dirt. So if I go back to my surfaces folder, go into Savannah dry grass, which is actually more of a dirt texture, and then drag and drop that color texture in again. And then for the last one, we're going to do our dry sand. Now, this one can get a little bit confusing because we've also got the ORD map, which looks like the color of sand. We always need to make sure that we are using the correct one. Sometimes it can be a bit more difficult to figure it out, but it's usually going to be the first texture in the list. So I'll drag that in as well. Now, our texture material up at the top, or material preview, sorry, it's always going to look a little bit broken because Unreal doesn't know how to handle a preview of lots of different materials mixed together. So don't worry if this looks broken, it is supposed to. Now, let's do the next one. So next we have the normal map. So if I go back to my wild grass, and we'll talk about normal maps just a little bit. So normal maps should look like this. They're always sort of purple and blue. And what they do is basically to add another layer of detail to your material without having to have a very, very high polygon mesh. You don't have to sculpt in all these little bits of detail, and everything that is pink or everything that is blue basically tells Unreal Engine, okay, this is supposed to be higher up or this is supposed to be lower down, so cast a shadow here or put a highlight here. So it basically tricks us and makes the lighting look like it's reacting to a higher quality mesh, when in actual fact everything is completely flat. And it's just a very optimized way of adding extra detail. So the normal map will always have an _n at the end of the name of the texture, so we can see in this box. And we just need to plug these into the texture samples in the same order as we did for the base color. So the first one is going to be for the grass. So my wild grass one, I'm going to drag and drop that there. It's okay if it changes color like this as well. It's just saturating it to be the way it needs to be. So the next one, we are going to go to the Savannah dry grass and drag and drop that in as well. And then the last one is the sand, dry sand. And I almost dragged the wrong one in then. There we go. And our normal maps should now be fine. Perfect. So the last ones are the ORD maps, which if we take a quick look in our wild grass, because that'll probably have the most detail, they can sometimes vary in color. At the end of the name of the file, again, it will say ORD and sometimes have a P at the end. And let's dive into it and have a look why. So this is a big mishmash of different colors and lots of different things that doesn't look like it's useful for anything currently. But what this is called a packed texture map. And it was something invented for games to try and be more efficient. The game engine will not look at this as all one thing. What it's going to actually do, if I turn the B and the G channels off, it will just look at each individual channel, R, G, and B, separately. And we can use those separately. So the red channel, or the R channel, is for something called occlusion. So if we have a look, we can see sort of some leaves that are very white, which means it's not going to add much to them. But underneath them, it gets quite dark. And this almost looks like a black and white version of just the shadows, because that's exactly what it is. This is going to add some fake shadows and some fake shading underneath bits that aren't actually 3D but should be, and it's going to make things look a lot nicer and a lot better. If we go to the green channel, we'll tell you what, we'll focus on this little patch of leaves here and we'll look at the green channel. So the green channel is the roughness value. So everything that is white is very rough and everything that's a bit darker is less rough. So it's that 1 to 0 scale, just like with an alpha texture. So that patch of leaves is going to be shinier or less rough than what is underneath all of the leaves and grass. Nice one. And the last one, which we're not going to do today because Unreal handles it in a little bit of a weird way, is the B channel, which is very, very similar all the way across. I'm not sure if this will come across on YouTube, but we do have some slightly different colors. And the B channel is basically for displacements. So with displacement, rather than it faking the movement of the mesh, displacement actually does displace or move the mesh up or down. And based on the black or white value, it will move it up or down a certain amount. Cool. So now we've gotten those ORD maps demystified, let's start plugging some of them in. So the very top one, we are going to plug in the ORD map of our grass. The next one, we are going to do the ORD map of the dirt. And the last one, we are going to do it for the sand. There we go. Now, we can't just plug this landscape layer blend straight into our material inputs. It's not going to work. We need to separate out the R, G, and B. Now, you could have 3 landscape layer blends and plug all of the R's into one, all of the G's into one, and all of the B's into another. Of course, we're not worrying about the B channel for now, though. But a more efficient way to do it is, if I make this comment box a little bit bigger, and drag just outside of the landscape layer blend, and then let go when I'm not plugged into anything, it will prompt us to make a new node that will automatically be connected. So I'm going to make a component mask. So if you just search in comp or whatever it is, just the start of a node's name, it will come up with it. You don't need to type the whole thing. So let's add in component mask. Now, I've got a node that says mask RG. Okay, if we look into the details panel, we start to realize what that means. We've got R, G, B, and A. So we can separate out the different channels after they've already been blended together. So I'm just going to make one that separates out the R, and then I'm going to drag out another pin from the landscape layer blend and search for another component mask. And for this one, I'm just going to tick the G. So we've now got mask R and mask G. Now, remembering what the ORD map does can be tricky if you're not used to it. So I always find the easiest way to remember is look at the letters ORD and match them up with RGB. They go in order. So O, our occlusion map, is always going to be R. O is red channel. R is always going to be G, which is our roughness channel. And then D is always going to be our blue channel, which is displacement, which we're not worried about for now. So with our mask separated out for the R channel, we are going to go and find that ambient occlusion, or just occlusion input, which is right near the bottom. So I'm going to drag a pin, and then, oh, I've missed it. Drag a pin, just go to the top, just so it goes up, and plug it into ambient occlusion. And then for the green one, I'm going to do the same, just move up to the top, and I'm going to plug it into roughness. Cool. So this is our basic node setup for a blended landscape material. So I'm going to save this. Always make sure you save your materials, otherwise the changes won't apply. And I'm going to come back to our world. Now, I need to find our landscape in the editor, so here it is. And we are going to drag our material into the landscape material box down here in the details panel. So if I go back to my content folder where I created it, so right here, it looks a bit weird, and it's going to look like everything is broken when we apply it. It's supposed to look like that, I promise. So if we drag, and we'll see, it highlights in blue again to tell us where we can put it, and we drop it into the landscape material, everything should go black. There we go, and a weird sense of shiny and glitchy. Now, we're not going to look at that too much because it is really weird. But now we need to set up how those materials are going to work when we paint with them. So if we come back up to the top left and go to selection mode and click on it, we're going to go back into landscape mode for this. So landscape mode will shift us into this little layout on the left hand side, and we are going to go into the paint menu. Now, because we've got our layers set up correctly, we can see in the bottom left of the paint menu under landscape that we have our grass, dirt and sand layer. Perfect. But why can't we see them on the material or on the landscape? So we can't see them yet because we need to set up how those materials blend together. There are a couple different methods. We're just going to use the one for what we do. So if we go to grass, and we'll start with this one, we can see a little plus button just at the end of it. So we're going to click on that, and then we want to use the weight blended layer normal option. And that's basically going to mean that wherever we paint, it will paint a weight map, or basically another type of color map that we can't see, and it will tell Unreal Engine everywhere you see this color or this weight, you're going to put this type of material. So I'm going to click on weight blended layer, and it should, when we hit save, fix our landscape, and it should show the grass everywhere. Perfect. But now we need to do it with the dirt and the sand as well, and you need to do it for as many layers as you have, because it needs to store that information somewhere. So I'm going to do it for that, and do it for the sand as well. Hit save. Perfect. Now we should notice that our brush overlay, instead of being grey, is in red, because we're in paint mode and not sculpt mode. So we've got grass everywhere currently, but I want a little patch of dirt right in front of me underneath this cube. So I'm going to paint that. Don't worry if the material goes all grey and darker grey again, that's just loading the material for the first time. And now we can see we can paint this material wherever we want it to be on the landscape. Let's say I want a little sandy area right in the middle underneath this cube though. Wait for it to load. And now we've got sand. And we can do this with as many materials as we want, and we can paint them anywhere on the landscape. So if I wanted a dirt path running through my landscape over up towards a mountain, we can paint that on. If I was making, let's say this was a little island, this hill, we might paint a sand texture all the way around the bottom of it. And then we're going to have a little bit of a dirt texture, and then it's going to be grass up at the top flat areas. We can do anything we want. We can mix and match as many different materials as you can find on Quixel Bridge or online if you've got all the right texture maps. And we can start to get something that looks really cool. Now at the minute, this doesn't look that cool. We can see the repeating pattern on the grass, on the dirt, not so much on the sand, just because of how the sand texture looks. But we've definitely got this repeating pattern, and you can sort of see the squares within the grass and also within the dirt as well. Now repeating patterns are a huge problem in games and game engines, just because this is how the materials work in general, and we need to try and break them up. Now there are some very advanced methods to break them up, which we're going to look at way in the future, because that's a lot more node stuff, a lot more technical maths based stuff. If you want to go ahead and try and look at it yourself, try and look into something called Voronoi textures, which is basically like a really neat and clever way of tessellating and breaking things up. Lots of very clever maths that I don't fully understand, I'm sure. But for now, we're just going to do something really basic to make it look like it's not tiled as much. So if we go back into our landscape master material, we can see on our texture sampler we have something called UVs. Now for second years who have done UV mapping with Jake, with Nikki in Maya, this will mean something to you. First years, this is something you're going to learn more about as we go through the year. But UVs is basically how a texture applies to a 3D object. So if you remember way back to primary school, when you did the nets of shapes, it's basically unfolding a shape, and then you colour it in, you draw a little face on it, fold it all back together, glue it together, and then you can see on your cube or your triangle, whatever it may be, your pyramid, it's got a cool design on it. It's the exact same principle. We'll go into that more later in the year with Nikki and Jake, but for now we're just going to do something really simple here. So if I right click and search texture coordinates, and get a texture coordinate node, we'll see we've got a red node, which I think is the first time we've used one. So these nodes usually only have an output. They never usually have an input. And red nodes are basically, this is going to do an operation, or this is going to do something important. Now, with it selected, if we look on the details panel on the left hand side, you can see we've got U tiling and V tiling. This is basically going to make it so we can make the tiles even bigger and they're less noticeable. So for now, let's plug this into the UV input of every single one of our texture samplers. So we can just keep dragging it down, keep moving, and just keep plugging it in. No matter how much you drag it, these pipes are going to stay connected, so don't worry about it being too far away. We're just going to apply it to all of them. And, oh, I can't see the last one. And there we go. And now we've got this big load of spaghetti pipes over on the left-hand side. But that's not that important to clean up for now. So, with the texture coordinate selected, let's change the U tiling to, let's do something extreme. Let's say 0.2, and we'll change the V tiling to match it because we've got a square texture. So we have just set these textures to be basically 20% the size that they originally were. Or, no, that's the wrong way around. Let's just save it and you'll see what I mean. So now, these tiles are bigger. So rather than 20% the size, what I should have said is a few 100% the size. Because we're working backwards in maths. So because these tiles are bigger, we can still see these repeating patterns, but they are a little bit harder to see because they're so much bigger now. And it would be much easier to be able to go into our landscape, go into paint. Let's set the strength to be very low and the brush size to be low as well. We could always come in and get a couple different variants of grass textures, and we can just start to paint over all of the overlapping stuff that's going to be close to where we're rendering or where our animation is going on. And we could start to just get some nice variation which breaks up the tiling. So now we can't really make out much of the tiling close to the camera. And we can do that for everywhere we need to do it. Cool. So obviously this is really useful if you want to have lots of different materials that you are painting onto your landscape. I would say if you want just some minor details, try and look into something called decals, which Quixel Bridge has loads and loads and loads of. If we go into the decals tab, and these basically just project onto something. So if you wanted to have some leaves, or they've even got horse poo for some reason, then you could just project this onto your landscape rather than making an entire material and having to paint it on. Now, this has been a very long, rambly video, so I'm probably going to call it here because I think this is the longest one I've done so far. It's something you'll get used to more and more being in the blueprint editor for materials, and you'll be able to create one of these materials in no time at all once you've done it a few times and you've gotten used to everything. I will say try and get used to using the comment boxes. So remember, highlight all of your nodes that you want to be inside it and press the C button on the keyboard. It's a really great tool for organization. If anybody else has to go into your materials, either me going into them to fix them in class, or you're in the industry and someone needs to go in to figure out what you've done, having comment boxes is a godsend, being able to organize in that way. So hopefully this has been useful, and I'm not sure what the next video is going to be on, but we'll find something to do, I'm sure. So keep having a go at stuff, keep practicing outside of lessons as well. It's the best way to remember stuff. If you need any help with anything, let me know. Just shoot me a Teams message or an email. Only during the week, not on weekends. I won't be responding to those. And yeah, keep having fun with Unreal.